Okay, so last week we got through, we got into Thyatira, and so I didn't want to, there was a good bit there at the end that I needed to go over, so I decided to hold that off. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to Revelation 2:24, or of course it's on the screen. But to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. So if you'll remember, what we've done thus far is we've talked about this temptation to enter into pagan worship. Whether that be worship of the emperor or whether that be worship in trade guilds and such. What's happening there is you're accommodating. You're accommodating your Christian values in order to either make money or provide or get comfort from a government that has the opportunity to persecute you. And so we talked about the Nicolaitans, and we talked about the person whose name is symbolically Jezebel. It's likely that Jezebel was a real person, but her name is not Jezebel. It refers back to the Old Testament where Jezebel led the Israelites to worship pagan gods. And the same thing with Balaam. And we put all those three together, and we decided that's pretty much the point here. That's one of the main things that we're dealing with in these letters. It's persecution because of trying to keep out of those false worship places. So here, again, we have this discussion of the deep things of Satan. And so that's going to be a parody of the deep things of God that is sometimes found in the Bible, and that gives us a hint as to what's going on here again. Note that what we're talking about here is secret knowledge from God allowing Christians to participate in pagan worship since those gods don't really exist. So it's like, since those gods don't exist, it's okay to go to pagan temples because they're not real gods. So, and you're going to get, you're going to not get persecuted, so you might as well just do it. The question is this: can we eat food sacrificed to idols? And the answer being given by and by eating the food, you're obviously in these pagan temples. The false teachers are saying, yes, of course you can. Right? But the author of the book here is saying no. John is saying no, that is not okay. And it seems that whole idea about the deep things of God, which John calls the deep things of Satan here, is going to be a misapplication of something similar to what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. So if you'll look at 1 Corinthians 8:1, or again, obviously you can look at the screen. Paul says this. He says, now, concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs us up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So it might seem as though Paul is saying it's okay, because again, those aren't real gods. So you're not really doing anything by eating food sacrificed to them because they're not real. However, that would dismiss what Paul goes on to say. So he says it at 8:7, however, not all possess this knowledge, this deep knowledge of God, right? But some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. So there are some who really believe that those gods exist. And so when they're there, they're actually doing it because they believe those gods exist. Food will not commend us to God, we are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours, the right to eat food sacrificed to idols because they're not real, make sure that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak. You sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. All right, so there's two things here. First of all, clearly, there are still those within the Christian community who believe that there are these pagan gods, right? And so Paul's saying this. He's saying, look, ultimately, yeah, you can eat food sacrificed to idols. And really more what Paul is talking about is if you went to the market and you wanted to get some food, well, it was a major concern if you were an Orthodox Jewish person that you didn't know where that food came from. And so it's possible it could have been, offered up to some idol. And so therefore you just wouldn't eat food at the market. It was safer just to do it at home. And so Paul's point is, look, don't worry about that because those gods don't really exist. So if you go to the market and you get food and it turns out it was sacrificed to idols, that's okay. But here we're talking about if you go into a temple or if you eat food and you have a Christian who does believe in these pagan gods and they see you eating the food, well, that may cause them to stumble and they may say, well, it's fine then to go to a pagan temple. So that's the point that he's making. So it's still ultimately not okay to go to pagan temples. That's not okay. If you were to eat food accidentally offered to a pagan idol, that would be fine. A modern illustration that you could use, and I know we're Baptists, but does the Bible teach that you can't drink alcohol at all? No. The Bible does not teach that you cannot drink alcohol. However, it certainly teaches against being drunk and things like that. However, if you were to take that right and be like, well, the Bible doesn't teach against it, and you had a friend, for instance, or a brother, I had a brother who was an alcoholic, would it be okay to sit there and drink in front of this person whom you know is an alcoholic? No, because then you could cause that person to stumble because they're seeing you do it and they're like, well, it probably won't hurt. I mean, he's doing it. And so that's the point, is that it's better just not to do it, at least in situations where it might cause somebody to come to harm. Same thing Paul's saying. He's saying, look, if there's any chance that it would cause somebody to think it's okay to go into a pagan temple and worship, then don't do it, right? And that's the point. And that seems to be what Jezebel and the Nicolaitans and Balaam, these people that are symbolic, the Nicolaitans are a group, but the Jezebel and Balaam symbolically represent teachers, actual teachers, that are saying it's okay. And it's not. And clearly that's one of the main things that the book rails against. But to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. So this, again, we have another tie-in if you go to Acts. This whole idea of not laying on you any other burden. In Acts 15, you have this big church council. And it is probably about the same stuff that Paul writes about in Galatians. And note, in Galatians, Paul is talking about where these Judaizers are coming behind him and they're telling the new Christians, hey, you have to follow all the food laws and stuff. You have to do all those things. And Paul is saying, no, you don't have to do those. Your faith in Christ is what saves you, not following the law. That's a step backward. You don't have to follow the law. So then in Acts 15, you get this church council where you have Paul and Barnabas show up there, Peter's there, James is there, and they have this big council. Well, what is decided at the council? What is decided is this: you do not have to do all the food laws and stuff or any of that stuff. You don't have to be circumcised. For it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay on you no greater burden than these requirements. So these are the only things that we're going to require you to do or to not do. That you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well. And so what it seems like here is that they're saying, hey, you can't eat food sacrificed to idols, and then a list of other things. But really, all of these things all have to do with being in pagan temples. You would eat the food, of course, sacrificed to idols. There would be blood there. What has been strangled, and sexual immorality are all things that would happen in pagan temples. Now, that's not saying that things like sexual immorality they're okay in other situations. But clearly, all of these things in this context have to do with being in a pagan temple. So even in the book of Acts, it is clear that you are not allowed to do those things. And it's also clear, because we have this specified, that that's clearly a problem, right? I mean, it's kind of like when you're on an airplane, and the door, what does the door say on it? Do not open while in flight. Well, why is that sign there? I mean, we're not stupid, right? That sign is there because somebody at some point in time tried to open the door while it was in flight, right? So it's the same thing here. When you read something here about, don't go into pagan temples, well, what that tells you is, y'all keep going into pagan temples. Don't do that, right? It is a consistent message concerning eating food sacrificed to temples or being in pagan temples. All right, at 25, only hold fast what you have until I come. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. Note that those who conquer, and remember, conquering in the book of Revelation means that you stay faithful to Christ even unto death. Okay, that's what staying faithful, that's what conquering means. It doesn't mean you get a sword and you get to fight in some eschatological war. So those who conquer in the book share in Christ's rule over the nations. Note that the nations are ruling over us in first century Palestine, right? And so the point here is in the afterlife, at the end, like when you conquer and you make it, you will be ruling over the nations. It is a paraphrase of Psalm 2, which is written to the Lord's anointed, probably the king, but it also is read messianically. So again, look at that at 26. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. Psalm 2:8 reads thus, ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. So in the Old Testament, the Israelites were to be over the nations. Again, the nations who were over them. Revelation 2:27 continues the paraphrase, and he who will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as I myself have received authority from my Father. And then that is a paraphrase of the second part of that Psalm 2:8 to 2:9. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So the point here is that the faithful Christians, they will get rewards that were for Israelites, the king, and even the Messiah. So being faithful to the Messiah means that you get to share in his reign. And I will give him the morning star. Okay, so what does that mean in the morning star? First of all, literally, the morning star is Venus. Okay, so whenever you read about the morning star in the Old Testament, particularly in the New Testament as well, it is an ultimate reference to Venus. But then Venus is used symbolically to refer to several people and different people at different times. Not only in the Bible, but also in non-biblical literature. So note that a star marked the deification of Julius Caesar after his death, right? So the pagans said, that star means that Julius Caesar is now a god. The star was also pictured on the coinage of Augustus and Tiberius. So you had coins with Augustus's face, and then the morning star saying that both Augustus is the morning star, Tiberius is the morning star. And then, of course, you have a Jewish tradition, which associated the morning star with the Messiah, right? Notice that at Jesus' birth, what do the wise men follow? Because they know a king is born, right? So that king, of course, is the Messiah, and so they follow it. It is a star, so it's a star like the morning star. But then more specifically, Revelation 22:16 identifies Jesus as the legitimate star ruler, morning star ruler, and his followers share in his reign over those who are merely earthly leaders. So where we see that Tiberius or Julius Caesar or Augustus are the morning star, no, they're not the morning star. Jesus is the morning star. He is the true ruler. The question throughout this section of the book is, who will you serve? Will you serve Jesus, the King of Kings, or will you serve an earthly ruler who can give you some comfort in your earthly life by not persecuting you, but then you lose out on your everlasting life after this life? All right, and then he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. All right, and then we move on to Sardis. Note that Sardis is an old and respected city. Really, all of these are old, respected cities, but Sardis was old and respected. It was a regional center for the slave trade. It was destroyed by an earthquake in 17 AD, and then Rome rebuilt it. And so they owed a lot to Rome. They also exempted Sardis from taxes for 5 years. To show appreciation, the city adopted imperial titles, including the people of the Caesarean Sardians. Religious life centered around the worship of Artemis and Zeus, Artemis being a child of Zeus, Apollo being the twin brother of Artemis. Trade guilds included textile workers, goldsmiths, and builders. Again, we talked about that. We talked about in order to be in a trade guild, you'd have to eat food, sacrifice to idols, and if you wanted to make money, you had to be in a trade guild, so that was a problem. We talked about here, even in Birmingham, we have, and I forget the Vulcan. I always forget Vulcan every time I go to say it up here. Vulcan, the god of the forge, right? And it's here because we're a steel city. And so we have a pagan god right there. Again, we don't worship it, so it's not a big deal. But still, technically, we have a pagan god over our city, which is a steel city. It includes temples to emperors, including Augustus and Tiberius. It had an influential old Jewish community. And Christians seemed to be getting along with the Jews and the Roman officials, right? Which seems like a great thing. Well, can't we all just get along? But it's not a great thing, because what ends up happening is they get in trouble because their life is so easy that they don't do any of the things that they're supposed to do. So at 3:1, and to the angel of the church in Sardis write, the words of him who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Notice again that Sardis was a city it was a formerly glorious city, but its glory had faded. And so the church is very similar. Note, too, that interestingly, they are the opposite of Jesus, the way Jesus is described. Jesus is described as he who was dead, but is now alive, but Sardis is described as they were once alive, but now they are dead. And that is on purpose. All right, at 3:2, wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. What works are we talking about? Well, if we look back at Revelation 2:19, there are some listed there. For Thyatira, I know your works, your love and faith and service and patient endurance, and that your latter works exceeded the first. So it would seem that it would be something similar to that. Wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. Their works, love, faith, service, and patient endurance, are lacking. Remember then what you received and heard. Keep it and repent. If you will not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come against you. And what we're talking about is we're talking about the second coming and judgment. Note Matthew 24, 43 and 44 talk about this. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. The point is to be ready at all times for Christ's coming. Notice we get this also in 1 Thessalonians 5, 2 through 4. At 5, 2, you get, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Note that in the Old Testament, the day of the Lord is the day that the Lord will come in judgment, right? So that would be final judgment. That's what they understood the day of the Lord to be in the Old Testament. While people are saying there is peace and security, right, just like the Sardians, then suddenly destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. Notice that there is an interesting historical background here. The Roman historian Herodotus, or Greek historian Herodotus, he talks about Sardis, and he says that they had never been taken in regular warfare. The city had never been taken in regular warfare. But on two occasions, when they thought they were secure, their enemies, one of them was Persia, they found a back way up a cliff. They climbed the cliff, and they surprised them in the city. And they took over the city by surprise. Well, this is kind of a slap in the face, because this is saying, hey, you remember those 2 times when y'all thought y'all were safe and you got overrun? Well, that's what's going to happen this time with Jesus. You think you're good and that you're doing everything right, but Jesus is going to come back and you're going to get called to the carpet, if you will. They're complacent. And they're complacent, again, sadly, because they're not facing persecution. We find that, note, the 2 churches that are facing persecution are the 2 that don't have any bad things to say about them. And then the 2 that have no persecution, they're the ones that don't have really good things to say about them. All right, at 3:4, yet you still have a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Note, on white garments, garments were made in Sardis, and so the imagery there is appropriate. But note, too, that white garments are the normal garments that one would wear in entering a pagan temple, and you would never enter before a pagan god with soiled garments. So the point Jesus is making here is that going into a pagan temple will actually cause you to have spoiled garments. And that it is not going into the pagan temples that will get you your white garments that you desire after this life. And so it's you want the white garments to go in, but if you don't go in, that's the way that you actually get the white garments. Also note that it says, I will never blot his name out of the book of life. We have some background for that in Exodus, for instance, 32:32. But now, if you will forgive their sin, this is Moses, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in what? Oh, I'm sorry, back to 3:5. So there's your blotting out kind of background. So back at 3:5, the one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Note, too, that citizens, right before they were executed, they would be blotted out of the city records, right? So they would just basically erase your name out of the city records, and you would be executed. And so note that the point here is, look, even if the city officials testify against you and they bring people to testify and then you end up getting convicted, and even if you end up getting executed, after you die, you will have Christ there to testify on your behalf. And so before God, you will be found innocent, even if you're found guilty among the pagans. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Note again, it always says to the churches. So all of the churches, all throughout history, are to hear these messages. So it's not just, even though the context clearly deals with these churches, we are to learn from those churches as well. We are also not to do those things that they're doing. All right, so Philadelphia is next. It was also destroyed by the earthquake in 17 AD. It was also rebuilt by Rome. They also deified their Roman emperors. Note that their coinage showed the mother goddess on one side, and Domitian, the emperor who was the emperor when this book was written, on the other. And so the point there is you have the goddess on one side, and so you get favor from the goddess, but then you have the emperor on the other side, and that says you get favor from the emperor as well. So who do you need to get favor from? The patron deity and the Roman emperor. If you don't have those two on your side, then you're in trouble. And the book's saying, no, they don't matter. It's you want Jesus and God on your side. They had a large Jewish community with heavy attraction to Gentiles. And there was clearly conflict with the synagogue, between the synagogue and Christianity. And we do know also, just from history, that within 50 years, by the middle of the 2nd century, you had 11 martyrs there. And so clearly there were issues, and they were being held up for persecution. And again, by 50 years after this point, it didn't get any better because you had 11 people who had already died for Christianity in the city. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. Note that this is going to be an allusion to the servant in Isaiah 22:22, who is given the key of David, and it is his responsibility to allow people access to the king or to not allow people access to the king. So kind of the point here is, and I'll do that verse, but the point here is, look, you've got the Christians who, again, they just believe they're Jewish, right? They're just Jews, converts to Judaism on behalf of the Gentiles, and they just recognize the Messiah, right? I mean, he's the Jewish Messiah, so we're all on the same team. And the non-Christian Jews say, no, we're not on the same team. You're a different religion. And so once they're called out as a different religion, then they are persecuted by the Roman Empire because they would at that point be atheists. Jews already were exempt from, in other words, they were a recognized religion. So they were exempt from some of the taxes and different things that would happen. They had other taxes they had to pay, but still they were recognized. Christians weren't. Christians said, hey, we're just part of these guys. And these guys said, no, they're not. They're something totally different. And then that opens them up to persecution. So they, in their minds, are losing access to God because they're getting kicked out of their church. I mean, it'd be like if you got kicked out of your church. You would, again, and we understand as Christians that you can obviously pray anywhere, but it would still sting a little bit if you got kicked out of your church. So that reference then is Isaiah 22:22. And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open, and none shall shut. And he shall shut, and none shall open. Note the point here is that it is Jesus who provides access to both the heavenly temple and to God the Father. And so even though you think you're losing access to God by being kicked out of the synagogue, you're not. You still have access as a faithful Christian. I know your works at 3:8. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. Again, you're not going to be shut out from God's presence. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. So again, that's what it's about. 3:9, behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, and we talked about this again. It's those who say they're Jews, but they're not, because they don't recognize Jesus the Messiah, and they're putting their own brothers out to the pagan authorities. And so you have these Jewish people who do not like pagans, but here they are working with pagans in order to get Christians persecuted. That's why they're the synagogue of Satan. They're working for Satan by doing that. Who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. So note that the non-Christian Jews who are persecuting them will bow down at the faithful Christians' feet. this is going to be a reference to something like Isaiah 60:14. That says, the sons of those who afflicted you shall come bending low to you, and all who despise you shall bow down at your feet. They shall call you the city of the Lord, the Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Note the irony here, though. That is a message to Israel, that the nations will bow down to their feet. And here, the promise is coming from Jesus, that the promises that were given to Israel will actually be given to Christians. And note again, it's not that they're replacing the Jewish people. It is an extension. Again, they would have seen themselves as just Jews who accepted Christ as the Messiah. We refer to them as faithful Israel, right? It is those Christians who recognize the Messiah and have faith in the Messiah. Faithful Israel. Not only will faithful Israel be called the city of the Lord, but they will be pillars in the temple itself at 3:12 coming up. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. Note, this is not physical protection. It is spiritual protection. Note the wording there. It says, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial, right? We have something very similar from John in John 17:15, where Jesus himself says, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. So the point is, they will suffer persecution. They suffer persecution throughout the entire book, right? So at what point do they get protected, right? We always say things like, God's going to, protect us at some point from persecution. And let me just tell you, people who live on the other side of the world, who are being tortured by ISIS and all these different groups that live in Muslim countries or, that are extremists or even China, those people are like, well, we would like to get in on that because we're being tortured all the time, right? So the point here is, it's spiritual. It's keeping them spiritually, not physically, from harm. Yeah, note that if this suddenly said that they were going to be protected physically, then that would be opposed to everything else that's said in the rest of the book. All right, so at 3:10, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. Note that the hour of trial represents the judgments here in the 7 letters, but also the judgments that will come later in the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. They will be kept spiritually. Note that the word hour, refers to testing before the end in 9:15 and 17:12, but also the final hour at Jesus' second coming in judgment at 3:3 and 14:7. So there's several hours of trial. Note that the saints are offered up to death throughout the book, but are protected from God's wrath in 7:1-8. So God's wrath, again, being against their spiritual situation. And that seems to be what's in play here. It is similar to Jesus saying that Christians will not suffer the second death. So you may suffer the first death, which is physical death, but you're not going to suffer the second death. That is what you are being protected from, the second death, spiritual death. At 3:11, I am coming soon, and we talked about this at the very beginning. That whole idea of coming soon, it has the whole idea of suddenly, right? And so if you believe that Jesus is coming soon, you're going to do what you're supposed to do. So you need to be prepared as though he's going to come at any moment, so that you aren't taken by surprise, like it said before. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Notice that the believer will be a pillar in the temple of God. So it's not literal temple. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from God out of heaven, and my own new name. Note that faithful believers will make up the new temple, and they will never be out of the presence of God. In the ancient world, whenever you had pillars, note that those pillars would be inscribed by either some patron, a deity would be inscribed on there, or even the emperor's name. And so here, note that the faithful Christians who make up the pillars, so you have these pillars which are made up of Christians, are going to be inscribed as belonging to God and to the city of God. And then at 3:13, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And then next week, we will start with Laodicea, and we will do that last city, and then we'll move on into chapter 4. All right? Very good. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.